Hello everyone, welcome back to Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming through a feminist lens. Today we are Alex, Jem and Matt, and we're going to be talking about royalty and nobility. So kings, queens, lords, ladies, aristocrats and all of that awful, terrible bullshit that I have been fucking smashing my head against the wall recently, learning about it and thinking about it. So that's what's in my head when we come up to it. Before we start, we have got a Patreon page now if you want to support us. It helps us cover some of the costs of making the podcast, and we will be releasing one Patreon-only special half an hour-ish episode every month. Now, to royalty and nobility. Why I think it's a feminist issue is because it's entirely based on your circumstances of birth. It's the worth ascribed to someone the second they emerge from the body of their parent. And so why that pertains to gender is the first thing they do is they look at the genitals and go, yeah, that one matters more than this one. And I don't think there's more of a stark example of that, of the difference between someone born to a parent who is on minimum wage and someone born to someone who lives in a palace paid for by taxpayers. So first question is, how do you guys think that, what your experience of how nobility and royalty are portrayed in games? Let's go first.
I can start if you like. You want to go, Alex? Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of how many games I've played that actually feature royalty and nobility, and I had to take a second because it's quite hard to think. But actually, I came up with a few. There's obviously The Witcher, which does feature like a lot of nobility within the different areas of the world in which Geralt is running around in. You know, you're hunting after Ciri, who I believe she's a princess. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yes, she is. So yeah, and you've got the nobility there and the kind of systems within that. There's also, you could argue technically that Ezio is a noble in Florence, so he's already pretty rich and well-to-do, and his family are well thought of, and that sort of thing. So yeah, those are the two main ones that kind of cropped up in my head. But yeah, when you think about video game protagonists, I very often find they're either like very poor and rising up and making a kind of reputation for themselves, or they're already at that position and they're kind of going against the norm of what is expected of them and rebelling. So there's a rebellion sort of aspect there, I guess. Those are the two main things that popped into my head when I think about that question. But I don't know if you feel differently, Jem.
No, I think I broadly agree with that. I mean, I think probably my most recent involvement with those kind of characters has been in Dragon Age and Final Fantasy 15, where you play the prince and his lads going out and causing trouble. But I mean, you rarely play the king or the queen. You normally play a sort of the next step down, or somebody who has authority, but who isn't in charge. I mean, royalty sort of tips up in a lot of games, but it is usually over there. You're usually linked to it. You're on a quest for the king or for the queen, you know, or the emperor or whatever, as opposed to being them. So yeah, I think it's strange actually, because when we talking about this topic, I hadn't really thought about royalty in games, or so I had to sit down and have a proper think about it, just to remember how it had kind of come into play for me.
That's that. I think that is part of the problem, in that we are, as with the patriarchy, where women are brought up saying, right, you need to get married, have a family, be a homemaker, do what men say, and all of that. That is normalized through the media that we consume. And so much of media portrays the structure of society having a royal and noble hierarchy is completely normalized, and that it's a neutral or positive thing. So, for example, say with our royal family, first off, the three of us are subjects to a fucking king. We are subjects. We are assigned to be inferior to a superior person based on his circumstances of birth. And the fact that I have only really understood what that means at the age of 28, almost 29, shows how, when we see our experience in games, we don't notice it because we think it's completely normal and neutral, instead of profoundly toxic and dangerous, in that we live in the United Kingdom. It only struck me a few days ago that we are still calling ourselves a kingdom. We have a king who gets hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, lives in palaces, has his arse kissed, lives in fabulous luxury, and none of us consented to that. No, we're not. It should be when you hit the age of 18. It's like a religion. You say, "Do you consent to be a subject to a superior person?" So starting off that, so normalizing the fact that we have pillaged the entire world and it's still seen as neutral. So I made a list of thinking back. So it takes a moment to look back and think of the games that you've played, just like with you two of this. So first off, Ezio Auditore da Firenze. He is the son of a prominent Florentian noble. And that's where he gets his wealth and privilege and fighting skills and all of that from. There's Amicia and Hugo in A Plague Tale. They are the children of a noble, which is why they matter. Eivor in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the son of a king, then adopted by another king. Arno in Assassin's Creed Unity, he's the son of a noble. Cassandra and Alexios, they are the grandchildren of Leonidas of Sparta. Batman, son of fucking born billionaire, which is... Have any of you seen the Batman, the recent one?
Not the recent one, no.
It looks beautiful, but the content of it is fucking embarrassing. Because South Park did the apex of parody of superhero films and stuff like 15 years ago, and this literally copies exactly what they were doing, so it's just embarrassing. And the villains are extremely people who have been left behind by society and are angry, and you go, just use your money to help them. Jesus. There's Jin Sakai, the main character in Ghost of Tsushima, son of a noble. Lara Croft, Lady Croft.
Don't know why that one slipped my mind. Technically, she's a lady.
Son of Lord Croft. And then, you mentioned Ciri in The Witcher.
Yeah.
Who again is royalty. So, you see, it is fucking baked into it in all the ways that patriarchal stuff is built into it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned all of those, and of course now it's obvious, but like you say, we all had to take a second and think, like, well, actually, how many games do feature nobility and royalty? And it's probably quite a lot of games I've played, or at least in that list that you've gone through. But yeah, like you say, it's just almost goes unnoticed because it's so common, I guess. I don't know. Yeah,
I think that it's important to consider for a moment the reality of your game world. So
very
I mean,
true.
obviously
Yes.
it's not real, so I think it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but within most situations people can only go off adventuring and being the star of their own show if they have the financial means to do that. So I think it, like so many things in the real world, unfortunately, people who these financially well off families are more able to do these things than people who don't, because just of the practicality of the cost of it and the demands on their time and their finances and their commitments. And so I think that some of it is just about that, which it doesn't, I'm not making any quality statement as to whether that's I mean, I don't think that that's a very acceptable way for our world to work, and I think it has a lot of knock-on problems. It's like in politics, the vast majority of people who go into politics are wealthy, because you can't afford to spend the time campaigning and standing for election at any level in society, whether you're talking about your parish or district council or you're talking about for parliament. You can't afford to do that if you have to do a day job. You can't afford the time, you can't afford the money to actually go through that process. So it makes it very inaccessible to people who are just managing to keep their head above water. And and it's even something that's difficult for people who maybe are comfortable, because it just simply isn't something that's available to so many people. So I think we live in this situation where people with money, people with means, and therefore people who've come from these wealthy families that have the history to have made all this money over generations, and that is the thing that I think we're all awakening to, is the idea that the wealthy people today are wealthy because their families were wealthy 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations ago, usually off the back of somebody else's suffering, and subsequently they have the money to continue to hold the power. And I think that is what we're seeing replicated in the games. I'm not sure if it's how much it links to our sort of obsession with nobility, which I think in the UK we have a really strong obsession with nobility. But I think it's also about the practicalities of who can afford to go out adventuring and exploring, like Lara. She could afford to do that because she didn't have to go and get a proper job, and somebody would pay for her to fly there and get all the kit and what have you. And in the Final Fantasy 15, he's got nothing better to do. He can go off exploring around the country and chasing after a princess, so yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
big rant.
No, that's where this is such a boiler pressure moment for me, because again, it's like learning about union organising and organised labour over the last year or so, going, this has all been hidden from us. I'm only learning about this now because of all the propaganda that has been fed to me since I was in secondary school, learning about Henry VIII and thinking, oh, it's funny that he he wanted to shag someone else, so he had her beheaded, and that we've stolen countless wealth and resources from countries of black and brown people, and that we persist in holding on to relics and artifacts that we pillaged. And the fact that, and I've said this before and I can't get it out of my head, that for the last, I don't know, since the pyramids were built, like 4,000 years, the wealthiest people have hoarded as much wealth and resources as possible, then declared themselves gods and said, oh, yeah, I deserve all this because I'm a god. And that has not changed throughout history. And it's as true now as ever. And I think the fantasy element is the linchpin of it, because the fantasy is that people who are wealthy are noble and just superior, just better quality in every way, which is why they have all the wealth and resource, when the truth is they just stole it and then came up with a convenient fantasy. It's playing tea parties, is saying, I've got all the time in the world and I'm a duke and you're a lord and you get to be a prince regent, and all the while the peasantry are suffering, and just the amount of suffering that this system inflicts so that these people can have their fantasy role playing is madness. Oh yeah, one other element of that is looking back. Do you know who Ada Lovelace is? So for anyone who doesn't know, she's basically the first. She came up with the idea of computer programming like 150 years ago. I thought, wow, that's amazing. And then you look back and go, oh, she was Lady Lovelace, wife to or daughter of a baron. So she's brilliant, undeniably brilliant. But the only reason she was able to do that is
because of the wealth.
She was a lady and had the wealth already. And going back to Marcus Aurelius, 2,000 years ago, in his, I can't remember what the name of what his musings were, his thoughts, writing incredible philosophy that holds true to this day, but he only thinks, oh, this applies to the nobility. It's not for the peasantry. So yeah, that's another massive part of the problem. When it comes to portrayals, so we've gone through a list of a couple of characters. How do you think that male nobility are portrayed compared to female nobility? So how is Ciri different to Batman? How is Ezio different to Lara Croft, for example?
Well, I can name a similarity. They use as protagonists, they're all very attractive, or what is presumed to be the ideal form of an attractive person, like in terms of what's going to appeal to our audience the most. Let's think about that. So in that way, they're quite similar because they're all obviously designed to grab people's attention and catch people's eye and kind of pull the player in on a surface, quite shallow level in that way. But yeah, in terms of differences between male and female nobility, I think there's still that sense of rebellion in all of them, where their parents or whoever around them had one set idea of how they should be. I think when you look at Ciri and Lara, what they have in common is that they're both quite tomboyish. They don't really want to be ladies or princesses. They're kind of taking up this masculine role in being independent and adventurous and wanting to go out into the world and see it and do more than just sit and be pretty. So in that way, they're kind of similar. And then I guess looking at people like Ezio and even Arno, they were also expected to do certain things as nobles within their families, and both of their storylines revolve around vengeance, which is something to consider as well. Very often that's a key motivation for a lot of video game protagonists, is the vengeance quest line. And for Batman, obviously, it's a massive part of his life. But I don't know if Lara's never really been motivated by vengeance. She just did it for the hell of it, I think. And then Ciri is kind of caught up in this thing, as we might get onto in a future episode, because she's essentially a chosen one, a kind of special person that's been chosen to have this key impact on the world that you're playing in. But yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on it.
How about you, Jen?
Yeah, I think that you've hit the nail on the head, really, there, Alex. And I think, there's definitely an element of, it's usually young, like we were saying. It's not usually the
old wrinkly
current. Yeah, it's usually the younger generation, and they are usually rebelling in some way. But I think what's interesting, if you look at the difference between the male and the female characters in these situations, is that the male ones are usually having a last hurrah before they settle down to their proper job, their sort of ruling position and their duties, and it's either going out and having fun, or, as you say, it's sort of driven by vengeance to do some last thing before they then go and carry on with being a ruler. Whereas the female characters, and I mean, I think this is interesting, because obviously it's not been long that we've had strong female protagonists. I mean, Lara Croft is a very notable exception. But so I think, we don't have that much to choose from, that much to look at. But the ones that I'm thinking, the ones that are sort of coming to mind, the ones that you've mentioned, Alex, and you've mentioned, Matt, I feel like they are rebelling against what is expected of them in a very gender stereotypical way. Yeah. So I think what you have is almost a difference. You have the male characters are rebelling for a bit, just to have that last bit of fun before they settle down. The female characters are rebelling because it sucks to be, female royalty. It sucks to be female nobility, because all they are is a commodity, just, to be passed around to whichever, man happens to be best for the family's fortunes. So there is a recognition of the unfairness of nobility, I think, that we see in the game, in the game's characters, and that is sort of played out. But there's never any kind of proper discussion about that topic. There's no one sits down and says, like, Ciri is rebelling against her unfairly gendered, future. and therefore she has to go out and risk life and limb, because she is running away from something that is more terrifying than all the scary monsters that she ends up having to deal with in her life.
Yeah, absolutely. So the men there, they go off and be lads for a while. Another element is the men tend to be playboys.
Yeah,
and it's cool for them to go and shag as many women as possible. And that's such a good point of when the men settle down, they think, oh, I'll sit down and I'll live in luxury and I'll get a nice wife. I can have sex with as many women as I want still. I can do what I want, basically. I've got servants who do all the boring stuff. and I can go and ride around the country and do whatever I please. And the women is just, I just sit in a room with whatever middle-aged man that my parents decide to marry me off to, and then having children. And I can't imagine. This is why reproductive rights and women's bodily autonomy is so important. As a man, I can't fathom how challenging and difficult it must be for a woman who gets pregnant and it's not on purpose and they don't want to have a child, being forced to give birth to a child. Just that element is... Can you imagine Lara Croft? She's never had a child. That's really interesting and has no indication that she wants that. And you imagine Lara Croft being... This is another just absolutely one of the most tragic things throughout history is Ada Lovelace is amazing and extraordinary, but there have been countless women who have been just as special and extraordinary and wonderful that have been completely destroyed by history just purely through this hierarchy that if Ada Lovelace had been born in a sweatshop, then she would have lived her life never having the opportunity to shine in that way. So that's the horror that the female like nobility, I think, they're running for.
Mm.
Yeah, it's awful. Another question. Do these portrayals in games, to what extent are they impactful on the gamers? Are the portrayals harmful in real life or harmless or somewhere in between?
It's an interesting question because a lot of what we talk about in our podcast episodes is the way we use games as a form of escapism. So we're playing characters we wouldn't necessarily have similar experiences to, but in ways that we can still engage with to kind of escape our everyday. And being able to play as a very rich person might be one of the ways we like to enjoy that escapism. So in some ways it's a positive in that way, if that's how you like your escapism. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't fully formed the opposite side of the coin, but I can come back to it if you like.
Sure. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, no, well, I always think that anything that we do in our entertainment, what we watch, what we game, what we read, what we listen to, I think it informs our worldview. And I think that this is reinforcing those systems that have been laid down for generations. I think there's a distinction to be made between, I think probably throughout most of society, most of humanity, we aspire to be the people with the power and the people with the more. You know, we want those things. I think for the vast majority, I know that isn't everyone's position, but I think for the vast majority, that is usually what people are working towards. I think that the issue here with this particular group of powerful people is that it's hereditary. You know, that it is, as Matt said at the beginning, you know, it is something that they have as just by right of birth, just by who their parents happen to have been, and all of us have privilege or not as a result of that. I mean, that is a thing, but this is a system of rights that are granted to groups of people because of who their parents happen to be, because of generations of this. And I do think it's really interesting because my husband is Swedish, so he has a very different relationship to royalty than we do in the UK. And one of the things that I've really noticed in our conversations, especially when we're talking about how we relate to politicians and how we relate to the royal family, is that the British people are extremely deferential to the noble system. We do support the idea of nobility. We like the idea of landed gentry. We do believe that these people not only are better than us, but deserve to have those positions and deserve to have that money. And that's why we don't rise up against them. That's why we haven't done a French Revolution, because in this country, for whatever reason, probably just because it's so inground, we don't react that way. We have an innate, inbuilt, unconscious bias in favor of this system, of this idea that people can be born into extreme amounts of money and they have a right to that is theirs. It's okay for them to own 90% of the land in the UK, and not even be registered. I mean, we don't, in this country, we do not know who owns the vast majority of our land, because most of it is owned by the landed gentry, hence the name. And we don't do anything about it. We don't complain about it. We don't do anything about it. And so I think that, computer games that reinforce this idea that people, as Matt was saying, that the nobility are noble and are better and are, justified, reasonably have a right to be there, reinforces that system, which is, I think, extremely damaging for us in the long term. And I don't want to see a revolution, because to everyone, but I would like to see a recognition of this and a dismantling of that system. That I think would be extremely beneficial to society, especially ours.
Yeah,
Viva la revolution.
I feel like the closest that we got was Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, because his platform was just, it's just so upsetting imagining the world that we could be in now if his platform had been implemented 5 years ago. And that's such a good point of, we look and go, oh, look at Ezio, I wish I could be like him. And I think associate that with, that means I wish I was a king, I wish I was a prince, so that I could have those things. Whereas what we all want is agency. We want enough that we can enjoy our lives, and that's not too much to ask. Whereas the problem comes with the massive wealth gap that is only expanding. And the more, so their goal, the goal of the 1%, is to absorb everyone's disposable income, because disposable income is agency. If everyone had enough disposable income to go, right, I'm going to quit my job and I'm not going to work for 2 years, that gives them tremendous leverage in terms of this, any kind of union strike stuff. So they could go, if you don't give us what we want, we're all going to quit our jobs and not work, and we'll be completely fine. But their goal is to gradually siphon it all off. And then if they finally destroy the NHS and replace it with a private healthcare system, that's even more danger, because people will lose their property. Suddenly the comfort of people who own houses and property, they are in danger of that. And it's just, it's not going very well at the moment.
It's an understatement.
Yeah. We'll just quickly breeze through the last question. Is, should there, we come across this a lot, like with Star, whatever it was, Star Blade something, Project Eve.
Oh,
You're
that one,
thinking,
yeah.
is there
Blade.
such
Yeah.
is there such thing as a character that just should not be made? Is there how should it change? How could the portrayal of nobility and royalty change?
That's a really difficult one to answer because it's obviously based on ideas about nobility and royalty in the real world. That's where it's taking its inspiration, and the ideas that we have around those and the way society feels about royalty and nobility. So I suppose an alternative, if we were to imagine one, would be something quite opposite, but to actually come up with an idea of what that might be is very hard because we don't know any alternatives, at least in this country. Like Jem says, it's so ingrained. It's hard to imagine what an alternative might be. That's not the most exciting answer, but
no, I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? We're so conditioned that we can't even see another way of being, and that is one of the biggest problems, like being able to sort of look outside of the way that things are to see another way to be. It's like capitalism. We're always told. I mentioned capitalism before Matt did today. That never happens. Is it? But I mean, capitalism, we're told that we would end up here in this situation, whatever we did, it would always come this way because this is the natural course of things. And that's obviously not true. I mean, there are lots of other ways of managing your finances and managing society, but it's very difficult to see another way of being when you're in it. I mean, I do think that we are seeing an increase in normal people being, doing amazing stuff. I think we do see that in games more and more, or people who, just kind of like, I think The Last of Us is a good example of that, actually. I mean, I know that Ellie there's stuff going on with her, that makes her not normal. It is Ellie, isn't it? The main. Yeah. Sorry, I just had a moment there where I thought I was just making up names. And, I know that there's stuff going on with her that makes her special, but, of herself, her background and everything, she isn't all that. And I think we see that more and more in, I think, like The Walking Dead and things like that. You see people from normal lives having adventures, and I think the more we see that, the more we recognize how popular that is, because in some ways, as a gamer, playing those characters is more fun because you can imagine yourself more in that role. And obviously you've got the escapism factor that you were talking about, but there's also I can identify more with somebody who comes from who doesn't come from nobility, who isn't a royal person, that I can identify more with that person. And I think that we are seeing an increase in games, and I think that's the way you challenge it. And I think put royalty in their place, which is a footnote in history, really, and move on.
Yeah, I think that again, coming back to the education aspect of it, is that only learning about unions and organised labour now, teaching myself about it, finding out about it by chance, and learning about socialism. And I think it comes about alternative power structures that are completely hidden from us as much as possible. We're only taught there's empires, which are great. There is capitalism, which is great. There nobility and royalty that is great. And that men are superior to women. We're taught the power structures that suit the people in power at the top of those structures. And we never see, I want to see games that destroy empires and then replace them with raising normal people up. That's what I'd like to see. To bring this, we'll bring this episode to a close. We've covered a lot of stuff. Remember to come back every Thursday at 7 p.m. We'll always be releasing something. Until next time, bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Gaming the System. If you want to support us, you can donate to us through our PayPal by sending it to wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com if you want to send us a one-off donation. If you want to donate to us monthly, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem. Until next time, bye-bye.